in radio. I mean, of course, now it's a little different because most things are archived on the internet. So if you miss something, you can go back, and even like I found snooping around that like you can get transcripts of Rachel Maddow shows and This American Life, Democracy Now. You know, many of the shows that you might like, you can actually find a transcript. So, you know, if I'm in a hurry, sometimes rather than listening to the whole show, I'll like just look at the transcript because then I can see quickly what I'm interested in. But I mean, most people aren't going to do that, and so in general, you have to be thinking about people are hearing it once, and mostly people are hearing it when they're doing something else, like radio more than television. Television too, but radio even more than television is something that most people are doing not with their whole attention. So one of the things that I started doing after I had been doing this for a couple of years was, I mean, I don't do it so much anymore, but not because I don't think it would be good, but just because I don't spend the time. I've gotten a little jaded, you know, also because I'm a bit more confident than I used to be. But something that I still find really useful is to listen to the show after I mix it. I go and listen to it, and I listen to it as if I were really listening to the radio. So I'll answer my emails or, you know, read something else and have it on. And interestingly, I will pick up things doing it like that I didn't pick up. You know, sometimes things make a lot of sense if you're really concentrating on them. But if you're not, if it's just washing over you, you might be like, what? And so that's often a good strategy to know if your script is working, is actually try listening to it with half your attention, which is not, you know, intuitive. Like we wouldn't think that that's a good way to do radio, but as it turns out, it can be. So what I want to do right now is play a couple of pieces of, you know, fairly short. I mean, these aren't going to be full shows, so, you know, but play a couple of things and then we can talk about what works and doesn't work. And I started to, initially, one of them is what you have there, but I'm going to ask you not to look at it while you're listening to it. I was going to print them all out and give them to you, and then I thought, no, because this is radio. So, you know, if you're looking at it, it's a little bit of a cheat. I mean, like, again, like something might seem to make sense because you're looking at it that might not make so much sense if you weren't. So, so I decided I have some stuff that I'm going to give you later, but for this.
The Rachel Maddow Show, weeknights at 9 Eastern on MSNBC.
Is that good volume?
Have a seat. Take a deep breath. Let it out. Okay, let me tell you a story. This man is named Tom Butt. Butt with 2 T's. If part of your mind is permanently 8 years old like mine is, the fact that his name is Tom Butt is a constant source of delight when Tom Butt is in the news. And you know, if that is your last name and you choose a life that's going to keep you in the public eye, having a giggle-inducing last name like that is probably both a blessing and a curse. I mean, sure, just like they have since elementary school, people make fun, they point it out to their friends when they see your name, right? But it's also a very memorable name. They also remember your name. And when you are running for public office, people remembering your name is a really important thing. I would say name recognition in this case is an asset, but his name is Mr. Butt, so I don't want to say asset. In any case, nobody has to call him Mr. Butt anymore, because now what you should call him is Mr. Mayor. Last night, against all the odds in the world, Tom Butt was elected mayor of Richmond, California, a working class, blue-collar city just northeast of San Francisco, where the oil company Chevron has operated a huge and sometimes troubled refinery for over a century now. A couple years ago, there was a huge explosion and fire at the Richmond refinery. It sent more than 15,000 local people to the hospital. And if you didn't like the time in 2012 when it caught fire and blew up, there was also the time it caught fire and blew up in 1999. And if you didn't like the time in 1999 when it caught fire and blew up, there was also the time in 1989 when it caught fire and blew up. That Chevron refinery in Richmond, California has been kind of a nightmare. And when the latest explosion and fire and thousands of people going to the hospital disaster happened there a couple of years ago. The city council and the mayor in that little city, in the more impoverished part of the San Francisco Bay Area, folks in that little city, their elected officials decided they wanted more assurances from Chevron. They wanted more safety precautions. They did not want to just wait for this refinery to catch fire and blow up again in their little town. The mayor and the city council started pushing Chevron. And so Chevron decided that they would buy themselves a new mayor and a new city council in that town. Buoyed by the Supreme Court's decision that corporations can spend infinitely, not only on federal elections, but also on little local elections anywhere in the country, the giant oil company Chevron decided that they would spend infinitely in Richmond. They would spend infinitely to elect their own preferred slate of pro-Chevron city councilors in Richmond and a pro-Chevron new mayor in Richmond. They dumped more than $3 million into the little local elections in this town to try to elect 3 new city councilors and to elect their own preferred candidate over Tom Butt. Tom Butt raised something like $40,000 total for his campaign as of mid-October. Chevron dumped more than $3 million into that town to defeat him. And last night, Tom Butt won. He beat Chevron. All 3 of the city councilors who Chevron spent all those millions of dollars to defeat, they all won. Chevron had more than $220 billion in revenue last year. They're one of the largest and richest corporations ever in the history of corporations. Chevron spent millions of dollars to buy themselves their own little city government in this small town last night. Their opponents had no way to compete monetarily with that. And nevertheless, those little Davids fighting that Goliath, they whomped Chevron in every single race in the city that Chevron was trying to buy. And now Richmond is going to have a mayor who one of the richest companies in the history of the earth has emphatically not bought and paid for. And his name is Tom Butt. And that happened last night. That happened last night. A lot happened last night. Last night, voters in the deep, deep red state of Nebraska, they had the chance to vote on whether they wanted to raise the minimum wage in that state. They voted yes by an 18-point margin in Nebraska. In Alaska, they voted to raise the minimum wage there by a 38-point margin. It was on the ballot in Arkansas, too, where it won by 32 points. Even in South Dakota, voters chose to raise the minimum wage, and they chose that option by a double-digit margin. There were 2 states where personhood was on the ballot last night. This is the pretty radical anti-abortion legislation that is favored by a whole bunch of the new Republican senators who were elected last night. Joni Ernst in Iowa, Cory Gardner in Colorado, Tom Tillis in North Carolina, Tom Cotton in Arkansas, Steve Daines in Montana. They all support personhood, this radical anti-abortion approach which would ban all abortion in every circumstance and some popular forms of contraception as well. But voters last night were asked directly in 2 states if they wanted to vote for a personhood law statewide. In North Dakota, it lost by 28 points. In Colorado, the numbers are still coming in, but so far it is losing by 30 points. Personhood lost by a huge margin in both states where people had the chance to vote on it last night.
Okay, I'm going to stop that one, but we're not going to talk about it yet. But I do want to point out that she had been talking for almost 6 minutes, 5 and 3/4 minutes, and she is not done yet. That clip, before she gets to the first interview, 7 minutes, which normally people would tell you not to do. And while it's television, and there are some visuals to go along with it, I can tell you that I saw it and the visuals were not that gripping. Like basically what keeps you watching that show, and it's not that atypical for her that she can talk. She will talk for up to 10 minutes without an interview or anything interrupting it, and people will normally say you can't do it, but you know, she's Rachel Maddow, she's one of the most popular television hosts on, you know, mainstream television, so you know, that's just something to know. But now, so that was obviously her post-election show. Now we're going to listen to another post-election show and just, you know, think about how they're different, how there might be similar, which one seems to work better for you. This was the thing. Sorry, this wasn't the one. But you can tell it's now. I mean, it was the one,
This
but
is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Naveen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. With Republicans set to take control of Congress for the first time in 8 years, President Obama has pledged to focus on compromise with the party. Republicans emerged from the most expensive midterm in history with a majority of seats in the Senate and their biggest majority in the House in more than 60 years. On Wednesday, President Obama addressed the new power dynamic in Washington.
Today I had a chance to speak with John Boehner and congratulated Mitch McConnell on becoming the next Senate Majority Leader. And I told them both that I look forward to finishing up this Congress's business and then working together for the next 2 years to advance America's business. And I very much appreciated Leader McConnell's words last night about the prospect of working together to deliver for the American people.
Shortly before President Obama spoke Wednesday, Senate Majority Leader in waiting Mitch McConnell held his own press conference in Louisville, Kentucky. He said his first priority was, quote, to get the Senate back to normal. When asked what specific areas he could work on with President Obama, this was part of his response.
Trade agreements. The President and I were just talking about that right before I came over here. Most of his party is unenthusiastic about international trade. We think it's good for America. And so I've got a lot of members who believe that international trade agreements are a winner for America. And the President and I discussed that right before I came over here. And I think he's interested in moving forward. I said, send us trade agreements. We're anxious to take a look at them.
One of the international trade agreements in question is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. Some analysts say Republican gains will accelerate the passage of fast-track legislation in Congress to enable an agreement on the TPP. The secretive trade deal involves 12 countries and nearly 40% of the global economy. Trade ministers from the 12 TPP countries are due to meet in Beijing ahead of the Asia-Pacific Economic Summit next week to continue negotiations. To see how the Republican victory might impact these negotiations, we go to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Lori Wallach, Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch and author of The Rise and Fall of Fast Track Trade Authority. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Lori. Start out by explaining just what the TPP is and what exactly McConnell says he has in common with the president.
Well, the TPP, unfortunately, is...
okay, so two pretty different kinds of scripts. What do you remember?
I remember Rachel Maddow said the same thing like 3 times about Mayor Butt, and I was getting really, really annoyed. I was like, okay. I know she was saying it because she was like in disbelief and stuff, but I was like, okay, well.
And do you remember what it was she said that 3 times?
Chevron bought a government and Tom Butt won. I'm like, that's really amazing. I get that it's really amazing. I was getting really annoyed.
What else do people remember from either of those?
I thought, listening to it, that it was a really positive spin to the whole loss of the majority in the Senate and the continued majority in the House. I was just like, hey, that's a really positive way to look at it with the minimum wage stuff. And because otherwise I thought it was a really sad election. The emotional, like, hey, Richmond beat, like the Davy Goliath, kind of excited and kind of with the 7th grade but stuff, which is kind of funny and hella entertaining.